March 15, 1974. Paramount Studios, Stage 7. Tommy Castellano had drawn against every quick-draw champion from Tucson to Tombstone. Never lost, not once. That's exactly why someone paid Steve McQueen to end his career. 300 cast and crew watched that afternoon. Tommy called out McQueen during lunch break, challenged him to settle who was fastest. McQueen smiled that famous smile, walked 20 paces, and turned. What happened in the next 0.12 seconds destroyed the biggest Western star in Hollywood. The studio heads held emergency meetings because of it. And for 25 years, when people talked about Tommy Castellano, they always came back to this day. The day Tommy drew against the king of cool. The day he learned some fights are rigged before you even reach for iron. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Hook. Tommy's Colt, 45, cleared leather smooth as silk. Same motion that had made him $20 million over 8 Western films. The weight felt perfect in his palm, hammer back, barrel rising toward McQueen's chest in one fluid arc that had taken 15 years to perfect. But Steve McQueen was already firing. The crack of McQueen's revolver split the air while Tommy's gun was still coming up. Impossible. Tommy had studied every frame of McQueen's Western scenes. The man was competent, sure, but no quick-draw artist. Yet there McQueen stood, smoking barrel pointed dead center at Tommy's heart, that ice-blue stare cutting through the gun smoke like he'd just performed the most natural thing in the world. The crew erupted in shocked applause. Someone whistled. A few of the stuntmen whooped and hollered like they'd witnessed magic. Director Sam Fielding stood slack-jawed behind his camera, the film still rolling on what was supposed to be just another lunch break on the set of Sunset Riders. Tommy's gun hung in his grip, half drawn, looking foolish as a broken promise. "Jesus Christ, Steve," Fielding shouted, rushing forward with his hands up like he was trying to calm spooked horses. What the hell was that? Where did that come from? McQueen holstered his piece with theatrical flair, that trademark smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Just lucky, I guess." His voice carried that casual confidence that had made him the highest-paid actor in Hollywood. "Tommy here's been running his mouth about being the fastest draw on the lot. Figured somebody ought to test that claim." The crowd pressed closer, everyone talking at once, slapping McQueen on the back, asking him to do it again. Tommy stood frozen in the center of it all, his reputation bleeding out through his boots onto Stage 7's wooden floor. Frank Morrison, Paramount's head of production, pushed through the mob with his face the color of old leather. His eyes locked on Tommy with something that might have been pity if Tommy hadn't known better. Morrison never pitied anyone. He calculated value. And right now, Tommy could see his stock price crashing behind those predator eyes. "That was impressive, Steve," Morrison said, not taking his gaze off Tommy. "Real impressive. Tommy, maybe we should talk about tomorrow's shooting schedule. In my office, now." The circle around McQueen tightened, leaving Tommy standing alone like he'd caught something contagious. 25 years in this business, and he knew exactly what that invitation meant. Morrison's office was where careers went to die, where contracts got renegotiated down to nothing, where leading men became has-beens with a handshake and a security escort to the gate. Tommy finally holstered his weapon, the leather singing a funeral song. His hands were steady. That much training doesn't abandon you even when everything else does. But something cold was spreading through his chest like spilled whiskey. "Sure thing, Frank." He forced his voice to stay level, professional. 25 years of being Tommy Fast Draw Castellano couldn't end with a whimper. Not in front of these people. Just give me a minute to clean up. But Morrison was already walking away. His attention shifted to McQueen like Tommy had become invisible. The crowd followed Morrison and their new quick-draw champion toward the commissary, their excited chatter fading into the hollow spaces between the sound stages. Tommy stood alone under the hot lights of Stage 7, surrounded by the false fronts of the western town that had been his kingdom for the better part of a decade. The painted wood and canvas looked cheap and tawdry now, like everything else suddenly did. He replayed those 0.12 seconds in his mind, trying to understand what had happened. McQueen's draw had been perfect, too perfect for a man who'd never claimed to be fast. The motion had been economical, precise, like he'd been practicing for months, or like someone had been coaching him. Tommy's eyes found the camera where Fielding's assistant was still rewinding film. Those 0.12 seconds were captured forever now, ready to be studied frame by frame, probably destined for the cutting room floor or some studio executive's private collection of Hollywood humiliations. The stage door banged open, and Castellano's agent, Mickey Roth, hustled across the set with his tie askew and panic in his eyes. Bad news traveled fast in this town, faster than anything except gossip and money. "Tommy, what the hell happened? Morrison's secretary just called. He wants to see both of us in 20 minutes. Mickey's voice cracked on the last word. "She said something about restructuring your involvement in the picture." Tommy looked at his agent, this small, desperate man who'd hitched his wagon to a falling star, and felt something break inside his chest, not his heart. Hearts were for lovers and dreamers. This was his pride cracking like old leather, and pride was the only thing that had kept Tommy Castellano standing tall in a business designed to bring men to their knees. "Mickey," he said quietly, "I think my involvement just got restructured all to hell." The words hung in the air between them like gun smoke, and Tommy knew that everything that came after this moment would be measured against these 0.12 seconds, when the fastest draw in Hollywood got schooled by the king of cool. 25 years later, Tommy Castellano woke up in the same aluminum coffin where he'd been dying by degrees since 1976. The trailer park outside Reno stretched in all directions like a graveyard for broken dreams, each double-wide housing another refugee from somewhere better. The morning sun slanted through Venetian blinds that hadn't been white since Carter was president, casting prison bar shadows across walls yellowed by decades of cigarette smoke and regret. His right hand throbbed before he was fully conscious, phantom pain from bones that had healed crooked after the accident 6 months after McQueen had ended his career. 3 surgeries hadn't been enough to give him back what he'd lost. The doctors called it complex regional pain syndrome. Tommy called it proof that some humiliations never stop hurting. The disability check would be in today's mail. $743 that bought him another month in paradise, another 30 days of Jack Daniels breakfast and TV dinners for supper. He flexed his fingers, watching tendons move under skin that looked like old parchment, and remembered when these hands had been insured by Paramount for $500,000. The coffee maker gurgled to life on a timer he'd set 20 years ago and never bothered changing. Black coffee in a chipped mug that read "World's Greatest Dad," a Father's Day gift from Jenny when she still believed he might come back from whatever dark place he'd disappeared to after Hollywood spit him out. His daughter's latest letter sat unopened on the kitchen table, forwarded from his old address in Burbank. The envelope showed her married name now, Henderson, and a return address in Portland where she'd built a life far enough from his wreckage that her kids might never know Grandpa used to be somebody. The smart play was to leave it unopened, to let her keep believing he'd drunk himself to death or found peace somewhere. But Tommy had never been smart about the people he loved. Inside was a school photo of a boy about 8 years old, with Jenny's dark eyes and a gap-toothed grin. "This is Michael," her careful handwriting explained. "He's been asking about cowboys lately. Thought you should know you have a grandson who loves westerns." The photo shook in Tommy's grip. Not from emotion, he'd locked that away with his gun belt and his pride, but from the nerve damage that turned simple tasks into daily reminders of what Steve McQueen had cost him. Through the thin walls came the sound of his neighbor Mrs. Chen starting her morning routine. 86 years old and sharp as a tack, she'd moved here after her husband died, drawn by the cheap rent and the kind of anonymity that comes with being nobody in particular. She knew Tommy had been somebody once, but she'd never asked for details, and he'd never volunteered them. Their relationship consisted of checking on each other during heat waves and sharing the occasional bottle of whiskey when the loneliness got too loud. A knock at his door interrupted the morning ritual. 3 sharp raps that sounded official, impatient. Tommy's blood pressure spiked the way it always did when the outside world intruded on his carefully constructed cocoon. Could be the park manager about overdue rent. Could be process servers with papers he couldn't afford to fight. Could be Jenny herself, finally tired of writing letters to a ghost. But through the peephole, he saw a woman he'd never met before. 40-something, dark hair pulled back severe, wearing clothes too expensive for this neighborhood. She held a manila envelope against her chest like it contained something precious, and her eyes swept the trailer park with the calculating gaze of someone who'd learned to evaluate threats quickly. Tommy's scarred hand found the deadbolt, then hesitated. Nobody came to Desert Palms Mobile Home Park unless they were lost, running from something, or bringing news that would change everything. He'd been hiding here for 2 decades, invisible and forgotten, exactly the way he'd planned it after Mickey Roth stopped returning his calls and the last of his Western reruns disappeared from late-night television. The woman knocked again, and this time she called his name. Not Mr. Henderson or Occupant or any of the other aliases he'd used over the years, but Mr. Castellano. His real name, spoken with the kind of certainty that meant she knew exactly who he was and what she was looking for. Tommy's reflection caught in the hallway mirror. 68 years old now, gray beard covering scars from the bar fight that had broken his jaw along with his hand, eyes that had seen too much and forgotten too little. He looked like what he was, a man who'd been somebody once and spent the rest of his life trying to forget it. But the woman outside his door wasn't going to let him forget. Whatever was in that envelope had brought her to the ass end of Nevada to find Hollywood's fastest draw, and that meant the past wasn't finished with Tommy Castellano yet. Tommy's hand stayed frozen on the deadbolt for another 10 seconds, time enough for his heart to find its rhythm and his mind to cycle through possibilities. Process servers didn't dress that well. Reporters had given up on him decades ago. That left family business or something worse, Hollywood business, which in his experience amounted to the same thing. He turned the lock and opened the door 6 inches, keeping the chain engaged. "Mr. Castellano?" The woman's voice carried a slight accent he couldn't place. Eastern European, maybe. "My name is Elena Vasquez. I work for Meridian Research Associates. We investigate insurance fraud cases from the 1970s. "Never heard of you." Tommy's voice came out rough from cigarettes and disuse. "And I never filed any insurance claims worth investigating." "No, sir, you didn't." Elena shifted the envelope to her left arm, keeping it pressed tight against her ribs, but Paramount Pictures filed a substantial claim regarding an accident that occurred on their lot in February 1975. An accident involving you. The world tilted sideways. Tommy's damaged hand gripped the door frame, fingers screaming as old fractures remembered new pain. February 1975, 6 months after McQueen had humiliated him, 3 months after Morrison had renegotiated his contract down to nothing, and exactly 24 hours before the bar fight that had ended any hope of a comeback. "I don't know what you're talking about." Elena's dark eyes studied his face with professional intensity. "Mr. Castellano, someone paid a great deal of money to destroy your career. The gunfight with Steve McQueen was just the beginning. What happened to your hand wasn't an accident." The words hit him like a sucker punch to the solar plexus. For 25 years he'd told himself the same story, that he'd picked a fight in the wrong bar with the wrong people, that his shattered hand was payment for being a drunk and a fool. The alternative was madness, that someone had orchestrated his destruction with the precision of a military operation. "You're crazy," he whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Mr. McQueen's gun was loaded with blanks that day on Stage 7, Elena continued relentlessly. Specially modified rounds that would fire without recoil delay. Your weapon contained standard ammunition. The entire demonstration was rigged to make him appear faster than physically possible." Tommy's scarred fingers found the chain latch and worked it free without conscious thought. The door swung open, and Elena stepped inside like she'd been invited, her expensive shoes clicking against his worn linoleum. She set the envelope on his kitchen table next to Jenny's letter, her movements careful and deliberate. 24 years ago, my company was hired by Paramount's insurance carrier to investigate questionable claims from the mid-70s. Most were routine. Inflated medical bills, equipment theft, the usual creative accounting. But your case was different. Tommy's legs carried him to the couch where he'd spent the last decade watching his past flicker across late-night television screens. Elena remained standing, one hand resting on the envelope like a pianist about to perform. "The insurance claim was for $300,000, she said. Supposedly to cover the cost of replacing you in Sunset Riders after your hand was injured. but the production notes show they'd already rewritten your character out of the script 2 weeks before your accident occurred. The trailer suddenly felt too small, the walls pressing in like they were trying to squeeze truth from his lungs. Tommy reached for the whiskey bottle on his coffee table, but his hand was shaking too badly to pour. Someone knew you were going to be hurt, Elena continued. Someone arranged for Steve McQueen to embarrass you publicly, then made sure you'd never be able to draw a gun again. The question is why? She opened the envelope and withdrew a stack of photographs. The top image showed a younger Tommy standing next to a man in an expensive suit, Frank Morrison, Paramount's head of production, taken at some long-forgotten industry party. Both men were smiling, but Morrison's eyes held something predatory. We found these in Morrison's private files after he died last year, along with correspondence that suggests your destruction was planned months in advance. Elena placed another photograph on the table. This one showed McQueen in conversation with Morrison, heads bent together like conspirators. Steve McQueen never knew his gun was rigged. He thought he'd genuinely outdrawn you. Tommy's world fractured like safety glass, everything he'd believed about his life rearranging into new patterns. The humiliation on stage 7 hadn't been random bad luck. His broken hand hadn't been the result of drunken stupidity. Someone had wanted Tommy Castellano destroyed, and they'd used America's coolest movie star to do it. Why? The word escaped his throat like a prayer. Elena reached into the envelope one final time and withdrew a film canister, its metal surface tarnished with age. Because you saw something you weren't supposed to see. And 25 years later, Mr. Castellano, it's time the world knew what that was. Tommy stared at the film canister like it might explode. His scarred hand reached halfway toward it, then pulled back, fingers curling into a protective fist. 25 years of carefully constructed numbness threatened to crack open, and he wasn't sure he could survive what lay underneath. I don't want to know, he said finally. Whatever's on that film, whatever I supposedly saw, I don't want any part of it. Elena's expression didn't change. She'd probably expected resistance. Mr. Castellano. Tommy lurched to his feet, putting distance between himself and the photographs scattered across his table. You walk in here with your theories and your insurance investigation, but you don't understand what you're asking. I survived by forgetting. I survived by staying invisible. You didn't survive, Elena said quietly. You've been dying in slow motion for 25 years. The truth of it hit him like a physical blow. He turned toward the kitchen window, where Mrs. Chen was hanging laundry on a line stretched between two metal poles, her movements careful and methodical. Normal, safe, the kind of ordinary routine that had kept him sane when sanity was all he had left. I need you to leave, he said without turning around. Someone killed Frank Morrison last year. Elena's words stopped him cold, made it look like a heart attack, but the autopsy showed traces of succinylcholine. Paralyzes the respiratory system, leaves no trace after 48 hours unless you know to look for it. Tommy's reflection in the window glass showed a man caught between past and present, neither fully alive nor completely dead. Behind him, Elena continued in that same measured tone. Morrison kept detailed records of what he called asset management. You weren't the only actor whose career he destroyed, Mr. Castellano, but you were the only one who might have witnessed something that could bring down people much more powerful than a studio head. The phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the trailer's stifling air. Tommy's blood turned to ice water. His phone never rang. He'd made sure of that, keeping his number unlisted, his address buried in layers of forwarding services and mail drops. Only Jenny had the number, and she hadn't called in 3 years. It rang again. Elena watched him with those calculating eyes, and he realized she wasn't surprised by the interruption. You told someone you were coming here, he whispered. I told my research partner. Standard procedure. The phone rang a third time. Tommy's hand found the receiver before conscious thought kicked in, some buried instinct from his Hollywood days when missing a call might mean missing a career-saving opportunity. Tommy? The voice was older, rougher but unmistakable. Mickey Roth, his agent, the man who'd stopped returning his calls in 1977. Jesus Christ, Tommy, is that really you? Mickey. The name felt strange on his tongue, like a word from a dead language. How did you... Listen to me very carefully. Mickey's voice carried the kind of fear that turns rational men into paranoids. Don't trust anyone asking questions about the old days. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to any interviews, and for God's sake, don't let them show you any footage from '74. Tommy's eyes found Elena, who had gone very still. Too still. Mickey, what are you? They got to Morrison last year. Made it look natural, but Frank was healthy as a horse. And yesterday someone broke into my office, went through every file from the '70s. They're cleaning house, Tommy. Anyone who knew about the line went dead. Tommy stared at the receiver until the dial tone became unbearable, then slowly hung up. Elena hadn't moved, but something in her posture had shifted. The careful mask of a professional investigator had slipped, revealing something predatory underneath. Your partner, Tommy said slowly. What did you tell them exactly? That I'd found you. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Tommy felt the walls of his carefully constructed hideaway crumbling around him. For 25 years he'd been invisible, forgotten, safe in his anonymity. Now Elena's visit had sent up a flare that could be seen from Hollywood to New York. Mrs. Chen's laundry fluttered in the desert wind, and Tommy noticed a dark sedan parked at the entrance to the trailer park. It hadn't been there when Elena arrived. You need to go, he said urgently. Right now. Elena was already gathering the photographs, but she left the film canister on his table. Mr. Castellano, if you don't find out what's on that film, you'll never be safe. They'll keep coming until... A car door slammed in the distance. Then another. Tommy's damaged hand closed around the film canister, its metal surface warm from the desert heat seeping through his trailer's thin walls. For the first time in decades, he felt something other than resignation flooding his veins. He felt afraid. Tommy watched through the window as two men in dark suits emerged from the sedan, their movements deliberate and unhurried. They knew he wasn't going anywhere. The trailer park had only one entrance, and they were standing in it. Back door, he whispered to Elena, but she was already shaking her head. There's another car behind your trailer. I saw it when I was gathering the photos. Her voice had lost its professional composure. Mr. Castellano, what exactly did you see in 1974? The question hit him like a slap. For 25 years he'd told himself he'd imagined it. The conversation he'd overheard in Morrison's office the night before the gunfight, the manila envelope that had disappeared from his dressing room, the way certain people had looked at him in those final weeks at Paramount. But Mickey's terrified voice on the phone had shattered the comfortable lie he'd been living. I saw Frank Morrison take money, Tommy said, the words scraping his throat raw. A lot of money. From men who didn't look like they worked in pictures. Elena's face went pale. How much money? Enough to fill 2 briefcases. The memory came flooding back with nauseating clarity. I'd gone back to the lot to get my script revisions. Morrison's office light was on and I heard voices. Italian voices, but not the Hollywood Italian. The real thing. The men from the sedan had split up, one heading toward Mrs. Chen's trailer, while the other approached Tommy's front door. Professional intimidation, the kind that left room for plausible deniability if things went wrong. They were talking about the docks, Tommy continued, his damaged hand crushing the film canister against his palm. About shipping manifests and customs officials. Morrison kept saying the product would move through Long Beach starting in September. Then one of them mentioned my name. Elena grabbed his arm with surprising strength. What did they say about you? That I was getting too close to something. That I asked too many questions on set. Tommy's laugh came out bitter and hollow. I thought they meant I was being difficult, demanding too many takes. I had no idea they were talking about the nights I'd been staying late, going through script changes, trying to understand why my character kept getting written smaller. A knock came at the door, polite, patient, nothing like the urgent rapping Elena had used an hour earlier. Professional courtesy that masked professional menace. Mr. Castellano? The voice carried a slight Italian accent. We'd like to speak with you about your visitor. Elena moved toward the back of the trailer, her expensive shoes silent on the threadbare carpet. But Tommy didn't follow. 25 years of running had left him empty, hollowed out, existing rather than living. The photo of his grandson still lay on the kitchen table next to Jenny's letter. And suddenly he understood what he'd really lost when they destroyed his career. You want to know the worst part? he whispered to Elena. It wasn't the humiliation with McQueen. It wasn't even losing my draw. It was watching my daughter grow up thinking her father was weak, thinking he'd thrown away everything good in his life because he couldn't handle being second best. Mr. Castellano, we know you're in there. The voice at the door had gained an edge. We also know about the film. We'd prefer to discuss this civilly. Elena had reached the rear window and was working the latch with trembling fingers. They killed Morrison. They'll kill us too. But Tommy remained frozen in his living room, staring at the artifacts of his ruined life. The disability checks that had bought him survival but not peace. The unopened letters from a daughter who'd learned to love him from a distance. The whiskey bottles that had numbed the pain but never healed it. 25 years, he said, his voice gaining strength. 25 years I've been paying for something I didn't even understand. The doorknob rattled as someone tested the lock. Professional, patient, but not infinitely so. These men had come prepared for resistance, and Tommy's trailer offered no real protection against people who killed studio executives and made it look natural. Elena had the window open now, desert air streaming in to mix with the stale cigarette smoke and regret that had filled the space for 2 decades. Come on, she hissed. Whatever Morrison was involved in, whatever you saw, it's not worth dying for. Tommy's scarred fingers found his grandson's school photo, thumb tracing the gap-toothed grin that looked so much like Jenny at that age. Like Jenny before Hollywood had taught her that loving Tommy Castellano meant learning to live with disappointment. The lock gave way with a soft click. Professional tools in professional hands. You're wrong, Tommy said, slipping the photo into his shirt pocket along with the film canister. It's worth dying for. But more than that, it's worth living for. The door began to open as Tommy finally followed Elena toward the window, carrying 25 years of buried truth into the harsh Nevada sunlight. The desert sun hit Tommy's face like a slap of reality as he tumbled through the window after Elena. Behind them, voices filled his trailer, calm, professional, discussing his absence like a minor scheduling conflict. These weren't the kind of men who panicked when prey slipped the trap. Elena was already running toward a cluster of abandoned mobile homes at the park's eastern edge, her heels kicking up dust clouds that hung in the still air. Tommy followed, his 58-year-old legs protesting every step, the film canister bouncing against his ribs with each jarring impact. They reached the rusted shell of what had once been someone's American dream, a 1,960 seconds airstream now serving as home to desert rats and discarded beer cans. Elena pressed herself against its aluminum skin, chest heaving, mascara streaking down her cheeks in dark rivulets. The film, she gasped. We need to get it developed. Find out what Morrison was hiding. Tommy pulled the canister from his pocket, its metal surface now slick with sweat. You really don't know what's on this? Morrison's files mentioned footage from February 1975, the day before your accident. Elena wiped her face with the back of her hand, leaving a smear of foundation across her knuckles. Insurance investigators aren't usually in the business of solving murders, Mr. Castellano. But when someone kills the subject of your investigation, it tends to focus your attention. Something in her tone made Tommy's blood chill. He'd spent enough years in Hollywood to recognize when someone was performing, and Elena's fear felt too practiced, too controlled. Who are you really? Elena's dark eyes met his, and for a moment the mask slipped completely. What he saw underneath wasn't the face of an insurance investigator. It was the expression of someone who'd been running much longer than a day or a week. My real name is Elena Morrison, she said quietly. Frank was my father. The world tilted sideways. Tommy's damaged hand gripped the Airstream's door handle, the metal hot enough to burn through his scarred skin. 25 years of buried memories came flooding back. Frank Morrison's office, the conversation he'd overheard, and something else, something he'd forgotten until this moment. He had a daughter, Tommy whispered. You were maybe 16, 17. I saw you on the lot a few times, visiting during summer break. 18. And I wasn't just visiting. Elena's voice carried decades of suppressed rage. I was working in the script department, filing revisions, making copies, including the ones that kept shrinking your role in every picture. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Tommy remembered the pretty dark-haired girl who'd always seemed to be watching, always present when decisions were made about casting changes or script revisions. He'd assumed she was just another studio brat learning the family business. "You knew," he said. "You knew what your father was doing. I knew he was taking money from people who scared him. I knew those people wanted certain actors removed from certain projects. And I knew you'd stumbled onto something that made them nervous." Elena's composure cracked, revealing raw grief underneath. "What I didn't know was that questioning my father's business associates would get me 25 years of looking over my shoulder." Tommy felt the last foundations of his reality crumbling. The insurance investigation is real. I've been using it as cover to find the evidence that would clear both our names. Elena pulled a small recording device from her jacket pocket. "My father wasn't the only one keeping records, Mr. Castellano. Some of us have been documenting everything." The voices from Tommy's trailer had grown louder, more urgent. Drawers slamming, furniture overturning, the systematic destruction of a life that had already been destroyed once before. But Tommy barely heard the sounds of his present being torn apart. His mind was locked on a memory from 1974. Elena Morrison, barely 18, standing in her father's office while Tommy waited in the hallway for script changes. She'd looked right at him that day, and her eyes had held something he'd mistaken for teenage boredom. Now he recognized it as warning. "You tried to tell me," he said. "The night before the gunfight. You left something in my dressing room." Elena nodded, tears mixing with the mascara stains on her cheeks. "A note warning you not to go through with the demonstration. But you never got it, did you?" "No." The word came out like a confession. Morrison said there'd been a break-in, that someone had ransacked the dressing rooms looking for valuables. "There was no break-in. My father had the note destroyed and made sure you'd never know I'd tried to warn you." Elena's voice broke completely. "For 25 years, I thought you'd ignored my warning, that you'd chosen pride over survival." Tommy's scarred fingers found her shoulder, and for the first time since 1975, he felt something other than shame filling the hollow spaces in his chest. He felt purpose. "What's really on this film, Elena?" She looked at him with her father's eyes, but her own desperate hope. "Proof that we were both pawns in someone else's game." The film canister felt heavier now that Tommy understood its true weight. Not just evidence of his destroyed career, but documentation of a conspiracy that had consumed 2 generations. Elena's father had been murdered for what he knew, and now they both carried the burden of secrets that powerful men would kill to protect. "There's a photo lab in Reno," Elena whispered, checking her watch. "If we can get there." Tommy cut her off, his voice gaining strength he hadn't felt in decades. "They'll expect us to run to the city. We need somewhere closer, somewhere they won't think to look." Elena wiped the last of her tears away, and Tommy saw the survival instinct that had kept her alive for 25 years of hiding. "Where?" "Mrs. Chen." Tommy nodded toward the Korean woman still hanging laundry, seemingly oblivious to the chaos unfolding around her. "Her son runs a camera shop in town, develops film for tourists taking pictures of ghost towns." They watched as one of the suited men emerged from Tommy's trailer, speaking into a radio. Professional disappointment, not panic. These were patient hunters who understood that desert terrain limited escape routes. "Tommy." Elena's use of his first name felt intimate after hours of formal distance. "When you overheard my father taking that money, did you recognize any of the voices?" The memory came back like a physical blow. Tommy closed his eyes, forcing himself to relive that night in 1974 when he'd returned to Paramount for script changes and stumbled into something that would reshape his entire existence. One of them had an accent, not just Italian, Sicilian, old country Sicilian. Tommy's damaged hand unconsciously traced the scars across his knuckles, and there was another voice, American. Someone my father might have recognized from the pictures. A studio executive? No. Wrong kind of confidence. This was someone who owned executives. Tommy opened his eyes to find Elena staring at him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Someone who could make phone calls that ended careers or started them. The suited man near his trailer was joined by his partner, both of them scanning the trailer park with methodical precision. They would search every mobile home, question every resident. Mrs. Chen's laundry line provided temporary concealment, but not for long. Elena pulled a small digital camera from her jacket. I need you to remember everything you can about that conversation. Names, dates, details that seemed insignificant at the time. If the film shows what I think it does, we'll need corroborating evidence. The film shows your father being murdered, Tommy said bluntly. Elena's response came too quickly, too rehearsed. The film shows what happened to you, what really happened during that gunfight with McQueen. Something cold settled in Tommy's stomach. Elena had been carrying this film for how long? Days? Weeks? And she hadn't looked at it herself? You haven't developed it yet. I couldn't. Elena's mask slipped again, revealing the frightened daughter underneath the professional investigator. If I was wrong about what my father documented, if this was just random footage of your humiliation, I couldn't live with having taken that away from you twice. The admission hung between them like a confession. Tommy understood then that Elena Morrison had been carrying more than evidence for 25 years. She'd been carrying guilt, the weight of a warning undelivered, a career destroyed while she watched from her father's shadow. Mrs. Chen had finished hanging her laundry and was walking toward her trailer, her movements unhurried despite the obvious tension crackling through the desert air. She paused near the abandoned airstream, her eyes finding Tommy's through the glare. You Tommy? She asked in heavily accented English. Men looking for Tommy. Say they friends, but friends don't break locks. Elena started to respond, but Tommy held up his hand. Mrs. Chen had survived the Korean War, immigration, and 2 decades in a Nevada trailer park. She recognized predators when she saw them. Mrs. Chen, Tommy said, emerging from behind the airstream. I need help. She studied him with the careful attention of someone who'd learned to read character in desperate circumstances. Your friends, very serious men, very patient. Patient men, most dangerous. They're not my friends. Mrs. Chen nodded as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. My David, he has camera shop. But camera shop in town, and town only one road. These men, they know one road. Tommy felt his last hope crumbling until Mrs. Chen smiled, the first genuine warmth he'd seen from another human being in years. But David also has darkroom and basement here, for special customers who need privacy. She gestured toward her trailer. Sometimes privacy worth more than convenience. Elena gripped Tommy's arm. We can't ask her to... You not asking, Mrs. Chen interrupted. I offering. 20 years I watched Tommy drink himself quiet. First time I see him with purpose instead of bottle. Tommy's throat tightened. Purpose. Such a simple word for something that had been missing from his life for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like. The film canister seemed to pulse in his pocket like a heartbeat, carrying 25 years of buried truth toward the light. Mrs. Chen led them through her trailer's narrow hallway, past family photographs spanning 5 decades of American dreams built from Korean determination. The basement access was hidden behind a false panel in her bedroom closet, David's darkroom constructed in the space where most people stored holiday decorations and forgotten memories. The chemical smell hit Tommy first, followed by the red-filtered darkness that transported him back to 1974. Every Western he'd ever made had required publicity stills, and he'd spent countless hours in similar spaces watching his image emerge from developer baths like prophecies of fame. David comes tonight, Mrs. Chen explained, switching on the amber safe light. But chemicals fresh. You know darkroom? Tommy's scarred fingers found the film canister. 25 years ago I did. Elena stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, her expensive clothes looking alien among the enlarger and chemical trays. What if we're wrong? What if this destroys what little peace you found? Peace? Tommy's laugh carried no bitterness, only exhausted recognition. I've been dead for 25 years, Elena. Dead men don't need peace. They need resurrection. He opened the canister with the same reverence he might have shown handling his grandfather's service revolver. The film strip emerged like a confession, its silver surface holding secrets that had cost Frank Morrison his life and Tommy his identity. Mrs. Chen retreated upstairs, leaving them alone with the truth. Above them, footsteps crossed her kitchen floor, patient men asking polite questions about her absent neighbor. Her answers came in broken English mixed with strategic confusion, buying them precious minutes. Tommy fed the film into the developer bath, watching as images began to materialize like ghosts returning to testify. The first frame showed the Paramount lot, February 1975, the day before his accident. The second frame made Elena gasp. It was Tommy himself, 25 years younger, practicing his draw at an empty soundstage. His form was perfect, his speed legendary, the same draw that had made him Hollywood's fastest gun. But in the corner of the frame, barely visible in the shadows, stood another figure. "McQueen," Elena whispered. "No." Tommy's voice carried the weight of revelation. "Look at the build, the posture. That's not Steve." The third frame confirmed his suspicion. The figure stepped into the light, revealing a face Tommy had seen only once before, the night he'd overheard Frank Morrison taking money from dangerous men. "Vincent Torino," Tommy said, the name scraping his throat like broken glass. "Chicago mob, but working Hollywood territory by the 70s. My agent mentioned him once, said he was investing in pictures, cleaning money through production budgets." Elena's hands shook as she helped develop the remaining frames. Each image told part of a story that transformed Tommy's humiliation into something far more sinister. Torino wasn't just watching Tommy practice. He was studying him, analyzing the draw that would need to be neutralized. The fifth frame showed two men tampering with a prop gun. The sixth showed the same gun being placed in a holster marked with Tommy's initials. But the seventh frame made Elena's knees buckle. Her father, Frank Morrison, stood beside Torino, holding what looked like a shooting schedule, not reviewing it, altering it. The timestamp on the frame read 3:47 a.m., hours before Tommy would face McQueen in what everyone assumed was a spontaneous demonstration of skill. "They planned everything," Elena breathed. "The gunfight, your accident, even the timing." Tommy's damaged hand traced the developed images, each frame revealing another layer of orchestrated destruction. "Your father wasn't just taking their money. He was their inside man." "No." Elena's denial came fierce and immediate. "He was documenting their crimes. These photos prove he was there, Elena, present and participating." The basement fell silent except for the chemical drip of development trays. Above them, Mrs. Chen's voice had grown more animated, her broken English becoming an elaborate performance of confusion that had sent the suited men elsewhere in their search. Elena stared at the evidence of her father's betrayal, 25 years of righteous anger crumbling into grief. Tommy understood her pain. The moment when everything you believed about someone you loved revealed itself as carefully constructed fiction. "He tried to warn you," she whispered. "The note I left. He must have destroyed it to protect you from knowing too much." Tommy's scarred fingers found her shoulder, or he destroyed it to protect himself. The final frames showed the truth Elena couldn't accept. Frank Morrison directing the placement of cameras, ensuring every angle of Tommy's humiliation would be captured. Not documentation of a crime, but choreography of a performance designed to destroy the fastest draw in Hollywood. The basement door opened as Mrs. Chen's footsteps descended rapidly. Men coming back. More men. Time to go. Tommy gathered the developed photos, each image burning his fingers like evidence of his own naivety. 25 years of shame dissolved into something harder, cleaner, purpose. Elena stood paralyzed by revelation until Tommy's voice cut through her grief. "Your father made choices. Now we make ours." The tunnel stretched beneath Mrs. Chen's trailer, like a secret that had waited 25 years to be discovered. Elena followed Tommy through the cramped passage, her breathing shallow in the recycled air that smelled of earth and old timber. "David built this during the Cold War," Mrs. Chen whispered behind them, her voice carrying decades of accumulated wisdom about survival. Some neighbors laughed. David never laughed back. The tunnel emerged through a concealed grate behind the abandoned gas station, 200 yards from where suited men were now systematically searching every trailer. Tommy felt the desert wind on his face and tasted freedom mixed with the bitter residue of truth. Elena clutched the photographs against her chest like evidence of her own mortality. The developed images had revealed everything except how to live with what they knew. "Where do we go?" she asked. But Tommy was already walking toward his father's truck, the one vehicle the hunters hadn't thought to examine. "We don't run," he said, keys materiating in his scarred fingers like muscle memory from a different lifetime. "We finish what your father started." The drive to Los Angeles took 6 hours through desert that stretched like conscience between their past and whatever waited ahead. Elena stared through dusty windows at landscape that seemed designed for exile, while Tommy drove with the steady focus of someone who'd finally stopped running from himself. "Torino will be dead by now," Elena said as Vegas lights faded behind them. "Men like that don't live to see 80. Men like that have sons, and business partners, and people who still owe favors." Tommy's hands gripped the steering wheel with surprising steadiness. "The photos prove conspiracy, Elena, but proving it and surviving it are different conversations." They stopped once for gas and coffee that tasted like burnt regret. Elena called someone from a payphone while Tommy watched the horizon for pursuit that never materialized. Professional hunters didn't chase prey across state lines without certainty. "My editor at the insurance company," Elena explained, returning to the truck. "I've been filing reports for 6 months about irregularities in Frank Morrison's death benefits, creating paper trails, making noise." Tommy understood. Elena Morrison had learned her father's methods but chosen different sides. She'd spent 25 years preparing for this conversation. The Paramount lot looked smaller than Tommy remembered, diminished by decades of corporate ownership changes that had sanitized its golden age mystique. Security guards who didn't recognize legends examined their credentials with millennial efficiency. "We're here to see the archives department," Elena told them, her insurance investigator persona sliding back into place like protective clothing. The vault where Paramount stored its controversial footage lay 3 stories underground, climate-controlled and cataloged by lawyers who understood that some entertainment carried liability. Elena's credentials opened doors that had been locked since the Reagan administration. "February 15, 1975, she told the archive clerk. "Incident report filed under Castellano Thomas. All footage from that date." Tommy watched decades of his shame emerge from storage containers like physical manifestations of memory. Film canisters marked with official studio seals, depositions typed on letterhead that had once represented his entire world. The screening room felt like a confessional designed for movies instead of sins. Elena loaded the official Paramount footage while Tommy stared at the blank screen that would either vindicate or destroy what little remained of his identity. "Whatever this shows," Elena said, her finger hovering over the play button, "we watch it together." The footage began with McQueen's arrival on set, his legendary coolness intact but something else visible in his eyes. Confusion. Steve McQueen had expected a publicity stunt, not a performance designed to destroy careers. Tommy watched his younger self approach the mark with confidence that would be obliterated within seconds. The cameras captured everything: his perfect stance, his practiced breathing, the moment when he realized something was wrong with his weapon. But the revelation came in the footage Elena's father had hidden from studio executives. Long shots showing Vincent Torino and Frank Morrison coordinating timing, ensuring maximum humiliation would be preserved for posterity. "They set up McQueen too," Elena whispered. "He thought he was just showing off for cameras." Tommy's accident unfolded in slow motion, the modified gun exploding in his hand, destroying 20 years of muscle memory in a burst of orchestrated violence. McQueen's horror looked genuine because it was genuine. America's coolest movie star had been manipulated into destroying Hollywood's fastest draw. The final frames showed Frank Morrison collecting film canisters, ensuring certain angles would never reach studio executives or insurance investigators. 25 years later, his daughter had found what he'd hidden and brought it home like evidence of love corrupted by fear. Tommy turned off the projector and sat in darkness that felt cleaner than any light he'd experienced since 1975. Elena's breathing beside him carried the rhythm of grief transitioning into acceptance. "Your father tried to document the crime," Tommy said finally, "but he was too scared to expose it." Elena's voice came steady and sure. "Then we do it for him." Outside, Los Angeles hummed with industry that had evolved beyond the golden age that had created and destroyed them both. But in the screening room where truth had finally emerged from shadow, Tommy Castellano felt something he'd forgotten existed: peace earned through understanding, purpose renewed through justice, the possibility that some stories told honestly could resurrect the dead.